Good morning, folks. Welcome to day two. Good morning to folks online. Hope we're ready to kick off. We might get one or two more in the room, but it's a nice full room already. That's great to see. I'm Callum Sinclair. I'm the head of technology and commercial at Burness Paul, and I'm delighted to be here today to introduce our first workshop of the day. I'm also on the leadership circle of the Scottish AI Alliance. I'm a continuing member for this year, so looking forward to getting stuck in with the team. Thanks for coming along this morning. I'm going to, without further ado, hand over to Dr. Gina Helfrich, who will introduce the workshop session and some of the participants.
Thank you, Cam. Can you hear me okay? Good morning, everyone. Welcome. Thank you for joining us. This is the workshop on AI for the next generation. As you said, my name is Gina Helfrich. I'm the program manager at the Center for Technomoral Futures at University of Edinburgh's Edinburgh Futures Institute. How's that for a mouthful? Today, we're really looking forward to engaging with you. It should be a very interactive, very lively session. We want to start out by just providing a little bit of background on what we propose to do and actually the several events that are leading into this one at the Scottish AI Workshop. We had received some funding through the Alan Turing Institute to conduct a series of workshops trying to pull in voices on the future of AI that are not typically brought to the table, not typically represented or treated as important voices to hear when we think about how are we going to live in the future with AI. And so the outcomes of those workshops are what we're hoping to engage you on here today and think about how we can very concretely move into the future in Scotland, the UK, and beyond with AI in an inclusive way. So to give you a little more detail on what those workshops were about, what the outcomes were, how that fits into what we're doing together today, I'm going to turn it over to the director of the Center for Technomoral Futures, Shannon Valor.
Thank you, Gina. Thanks to everybody for coming and joining us today. Thanks to everyone online. We're really excited to be here to share with you at least the preliminary outcomes of these workshops that we have conducted over the past few months. So I'm just going to give you some kind of backstory on the project, and then I'm going to hand it over to the project lead, Dr. Kasserzada, who will take you through a few of the details, and you'll get to see who participated in the workshops and what some of the provocations that came out of them were. And that's largely what we're going to ask you to engage with today, is those provocations so that we can build further from these workshops to bring more voices into the conversation. The conversation itself is a conversation about the future of AI. And we hear these questions being asked a lot on all kinds of stages around the world these days, right? In every major media channel, every major research university is now focused on this. With ChatGPT, it's clear that there's an urgent need to think carefully, quickly, and act responsibly in order to shape a future for AI that's compatible with and ideally enhancing human flourishing rather than impeding it. But a lot of these conversations happen on stages where the people answering that question already have a great deal of power in the AI ecosystem. Either they're leaders in computing or industry or government or academics like myself who make a career out of standing on these kinds of stages. And yet that's a tiny fraction of the people whose lives and quality of life and communities are really at stake in these decisions. And so we talk a lot about data and AI justice. We talk a lot about inclusion, right? We have it right here, trustworthy, ethical, inclusive, but inclusive is hard, right? That doesn't get done by just allowing the people who already have a voice in these conversations to say more. And yet it's very difficult to avoid that dynamic. And in fact, we began to think about this very carefully when we were planning an event that took place at the University of Edinburgh on March 6th, just a few weeks ago. So we had an amazing event. Maybe some of you saw it or attended on the future of AI. We had a pioneer in AI, Stuart Russell from the University of California at Berkeley. We had Kate Crawford from AI Now. We had Pascal Fung, a leader in AI in Hong Kong and globally. We had Petra Molnar, who works on the kind of legal and human rights dimensions of AI. We had William Isaac, a pioneer in ethics and society work at DeepMind. It's a fantastic panel, chaired by our lead AI researcher at the University of Edinburgh and director of the Bayes Center, Michael Rabatsos. Wonderful conversation. But all of these people get asked these questions on these kinds of stages all the time. And as we were planning for this event, we said, what more can we do to make sure that these conversations don't stay in these rooms and end with these voices and perspectives? So we decided to ask the Turing Institute to help us expand that conversation. And the Turing Institute gave us some funding to bring together a series of workshops that would lead into the March event. And out of those workshops, which Dr. Kasserzadeh led and we'll talk about in a moment, we got a number of provocations, basically challenges to those voices that have been dominating the conversation to date. And we are going to share some of those provocations with you today. We've selected 4 to focus on. There will be a written report that will come out of all of this that will detail more of the provocations and insights that we gathered. But we're really excited to share the early results of that with you here today, and then invite you to join this conversation and continue to shape it. So with that, I'm going to hand over to Dr. Kasserzadeh, who is the principal investigator on the project. She's also our research lead at the University of Edinburgh's Edinburgh Futures Institute's Center for Technomoral Futures. We really have to find a way to shorten that. And I'm really honored to give her the stage so she can tell you more.
Okay, good morning, everyone. Yeah, my name is Atusa Kasserzadeh. I'm at the Center for Technomoral Futures, and I'm a mathematician and philosopher of science and technology. I've been working on questions about AI ethics and safety for a couple of years now. And now I'm going to say a little bit more about these workshops, like about the content of the workshops, the kinds of participants we had. So we organized 3 day-long workshops, and we really tried to bring in different kind of voices from or underrepresented communities across the world. And considering that we have this kind of like time challenges, I think we kind of like did a good job to bring in voices from across the globe, from India to Singapore to South America to the United States. Basically, the point was that when we bring in all these voices that are underrepresented, what new kind of conversations and questions kind of emerge. And we think that it's really, really important that both the leading AI researchers in different labs across the world, but also academics, kind of engage with these voices more and more, and how powerful it is. I mean, yesterday we saw here that children came from the Children's Parliament, and they told us we have to listen to them. And I think it was so impactful just to hear from them the importance of hearing about their rights and thinking about their rights while we are developing technological systems and how we are kind of advancing research. So we had 3 workshops, and we kind of like try to focus each workshop on a specific theme. The themes were defined very broadly because we wanted to give our participants freedom to kind of feed into this kind of discussion. So whatever angle they want to think about, they want to contribute to, they want to raise, they can. So one of the workshops was focused on the topic of health and well-being. And we kind of wanted to hear from our participants, again, from different kind of communities, some universities. We had like fantastic people from African Alliance of Digital Health Networks, and from National Primary Healthcare Development Agency, Sign Video, and People Know How, and other communities. And basically the question that we wanted to kind of discuss in this is like, what are the challenges and the opportunities that the developers of AI systems need to face, need to think about, need to consider when we are designing the systems that kind of veer on the future of health and well-being. Our second workshop kind of tried to focus on the future of work and democracy. These are two kind of topics that overlap a lot. And so basically we again here try to bring in people from different kind of communities. And so the question that we asked and we discussed in our day-long workshop on work and democracy was, what are again the challenges and opportunities related to the work and democracy that these kind of systems are, the designers of these systems need to face, need to consider. And it's not just a question basically for the designers of the systems, but the society as a whole, all the institutions that want to regulate the systems, like what kind of questions or interdisciplinary questions we need to really focus on. And our third workshop was on the topic of sustainability. Again, we really try to bring in people, not only from different parts of the world, but also different kind of communities, different perspectives, just to think about the future of sustainability and how the development of these AI systems is changing our conception of sustainability, sustainable future, how AI systems can help us to bring in sustainable future in the face of some of the existential crises that we are dealing with, for example, climate change, but also many other kind of sustainability issues. But basically, we try to discuss many different kind of sustainability frameworks, such as the UN goals for sustainable development. So basically, for me, and I think for the other organizers, these workshops were very kind of eye-opening, because we normally in academia sit and think about these questions from our own perspectives, right? But you bring in people who are on the ground, who are thinking about these questions, really interesting participants. And I think one maybe high-level lesson that I learned from this is that academics or people in industry need to hear more and more from communities. Some of our participants were just very much enjoyed the workshops, and they were asking for more sustainable kind of collaboration. So it shouldn't be just a one-time kind of like collaboration, but it should become a thing that we get used to it, and we want to hear from communities all the time in interesting ways. Okay, so I'm going to also briefly introduce the project team. I was a principal investigator, but without the help of collaborators, it was impossible to organize these workshops. We have our fantastic research assistant here, George Noteboom, who is a PhD student at the University of Edinburgh. We had two other research assistants that unfortunately couldn't be with us in person. Aditya Singh, again, PhD student at the University of Edinburgh, and Lara Dalmolin. We also had Christy Hewitt, who helped us very much in organizing. Very grateful to her, and Dr. Valor and Dr. Helfrich. Okay, so briefly, like summarizing the provocations again, we tried to have like a very open sort of discussions, but at the end of each of the workshops, we kind of wanted to distill the information discussions we had into a set of provocations that, as Professor Valor mentioned, we wanted to kind of mention and give these kind of provocations to the leaders in the AI world, and think about and kind of learn from them whether they've thought about these questions or how they want to kind of handle and think about these kind of questions. So we're going to mention 4 of the provocations today, and as Dr. Helfrich will kind of talk to you later about it, you're going to kind of deal and basically work about some of these provocations through the activities. So the first provocation, again, that we got through these workshops is, how can we shift from a design AI futures for culture to a design AI futures with and by culture? And what do we mean here? It looks like most of the times, or typically, there are some companies that design some technologies, and then they give it to us, and then the other people need to kind of like adapt to these technologies. And so the kind of like issue or kind of challenge that many of our participants were mentioning was that why these designers don't come to us from the beginning, why they don't try to learn about our needs and our goals. So instead of they imposing the AI systems on us, they come to us and we kind of try to design and develop AI systems together. And I think this is just such an impressive question. And again, yesterday, for those of you who were in this fantastic workshop with the Children Parliament group, we just saw that that kind of initiative is one way to kind of push this question forward, including the voices of children. Okay, the second provocation is, how do we design and govern AI system wisely and inclusively amid the race for AI superiority? So this race for AI superiority can happen within a specific nation state, right? So we can have, for example, Alphabet being in race with OpenAI, but it can also happen much more globally, right? So for example, United States versus China. So there are all these kinds of angles of race for AI superiority. And given that that kind of race is a reality of our world, how can we still ensure that we can design and govern AI systems? Very hard question, right? Requires to hear and think about this question from many different perspectives. That's a question that we gave. And so basically one of the kind of reformulation of this question, or one way to think about it, is whether we need something like a slow AI movement. And it's really interesting to talk about this provocation, because just today there was this statement that was released by the Future of AI Institute, and there were more than 1,000 researchers across the world that suddenly came up and saying that we have to stop training language models that are bigger than GPT-4. And I think this is, at least in my memory, this is a thing that did not happen before with respect to AI systems. Whether this can be operationalized or not, we're going to see. But this is exactly one reaction, even from within the AI community, about this need for maybe a slow AI movement. The third provocation is, why do we not stress the obligation of AI researchers and designers to develop greater social literacy about the communities and contexts they claim to build AI for? Right, so it shouldn't be the case that they just build these systems and then there's so much progress, so much technological progress, that even for computer scientists, it's sometimes hard to catch up. And I'll think about people who are not working in technological sector, and there's so much pressure on them to kind of learn and get literate about what's happening. So there was a need, basically voice being heard from the underrepresented communities, that they actually wanted this kind of developers to act more responsibly. And the fourth provocation is, might we need to decenter AI in the current media environment to avoid neglecting other fundamental and pressing issues? Okay, so these provocations, we installed them on the wall. And with that in mind, I'm gonna now hand it over back to Dr. Helfrich to talk about the activities that we are going to all engage in the rest of the workshop.
Thanks, Atusa. Can I grab that from you? Thanks. Okay, so now to the logistics of this business. We would like you all in breakout groups, which for those in person is going to mean just at your table. And those online, are we sticking with one group or two, Joe? Our online is all going to just be one single breakout group. We'll work together to consider these provocations, and you will only have one provocation so that you can kind of do a deep dive on it for 15 or 20 minutes. And what we'd like you to do is identify a set of actions in response to the provocation that can help build better AI futures in Scotland and beyond. So some of the questions that you might want to think about are, who is it that's going to take this action? And what incentives might be needed for this action to happen? So what we really want to do is try to come up with some concrete next steps for how we might move forward with AI on the basis of the provocations. And at the conclusion of your conversation, which I will prompt you, just to record 3 of the actions that you've come up with on Post-it notes for sharing together at the end. So the way that we're going to do this, I'll start with the online group. Hey, Steph. The online group is going to discuss provocation 4. Might we need to decenter AI in the current media environment to avoid neglecting other fundamental and pressing issues? And then in the room, the pink notes are going to do provocation 1. How can we shift from a design AI futures for culture to a design AI futures with and by culture? And then group 2, which is yellow, will be how do we design and govern AI wisely and inclusively? And amid the race for AI superiority, do we need something like a slow AI movement? And then green will be provocation 3. Why do we not stress the obligation of AI researchers and designers to develop greater social literacy about the communities and contexts they claim to build for AI? So the one request I have, we're pretty evenly spaced. Every table has 4 or 5, except this table has 3 and this table has 6. So could I have a valiant volunteer to migrate from that table to this one? Thank you so much. Now we'll be evenly balanced. So the 3 of us will be kind of meandering amongst the tables, helping hopefully to facilitate some of the conversation. And we have Joe and Aditya to do the same for the online group. I will be back on the mic in about 15 or 20 minutes to pull the conversation to a close and come back together. So I'll leave it to you from here.
Hello to everyone in the online group. Sounds like we're just going to stay in the main room, but don't worry, the volume is off in the room, so no one can hear us. Can you hear me, Aditya?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay. Would any of the online participants like to raise their head above the parapet? Oh, hello. Hi, James. Where are you joining us from?
I'm joining you from Ayr on the west coast of Scotland.
Great, welcome. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks for being here.
Do we know if we have any of the other participants with us, or are they just listening in? Because that's fine as well. We can then kind of continue the conversation.
So, I mean, I can give you, not from my current role, but from a previous role. I worked for a transport quango, and they collated lots. They have lots and was particular around about bus transport. And they had lots and lots and lots and lots of data. Didn't know what to do with it. So we did do some work in that. But I suppose it's, if I'm thinking, again, I'm just thinking of the remit here, how do you make it relevant to Scottish people, etc. So one of the, it's not specific to AI, but it is a technology related and it's a data related thing is, so within the transport industry, particularly in Scotland, there is a drive towards online data. So basically you get your bus timetable, you get your real-time data from your bus on your phone or on real-time screens. But the reality is the people that use buses, or the majority of the people who use buses, are either in the older demographic, so they're not tech savvy and they're not keen in using apps, or they are in the low income bands. So they might have a phone, but it's not a smartphone. So I'm just thinking, right, again, I'm just thinking, if you think that there's a very, very obvious, well-intentioned thing. There's an absolute drive to making the data online, but you're actually disconnecting 80% of your user base. So I'm just thinking, I'm again, this is because we've got a fairly open provocation. It's just, how do you stop the same thing happen by, let's say, AI-based access to public services or something? You essentially digitally disenfranchise people. So I know, and that's not a rant, by the way. I mean, it's not. It's just it was an observation. It was a fairly common, I'm not say criticism, but feedback we would get from user groups. So it's just from the kind of opening comments on there. How do we make sure we don't do the same thing as we AI enable access to public services?
Hi guys, it's Stephen here. Yeah, I think James is right. I mean, it's a common theme when we work with Scottish Government, in that user-centric approach to design is always the first thing that we must consider, and that's not a should or a could, that's a must. So that ability for people to access an online service is always the first question, and what's plan B is the next question when you don't have access to that. And that's across the board when it comes to Scottish Government services. It's one of the first things that I've certainly come across when I've worked with Scottish Government. It's always, what is the user-centric design going to be? How are we going to enable people who are in that small demographic who may not have access or not enabled or not able to access that things online? That could be through disability, it could be through social deprivation, it could be through the lack of ability to use a device of any particular kind. That could be an age group thing. Again, it could be disability. That kind of stuff is one of the key questions that's always asked when it comes to any of the service design of Scottish Government that I've come across. I think, James, I don't know if you come across the same thing, but I have. Yeah.
Yeah, so there's a digital first enthusiasm, and the reality is it's sometimes I guess if you think about it in the broader social aspect, it works. But again, the example I gave you with bus travel, irrespective of what it is, and again, part of the challenge is, if you take bus operators as an example, it's great for them. They don't need to print bus timetables. That's, and by they don't need to update bus. I never realised until I worked in that industry how expensive that was, updating bus stop timetables. If you use that as an example, so they absolutely want to go there, but the reality is the body of people who use that service have been disconnected. And again, I don't want to make this all about that example. It's just the principle.
Yeah, it's a great example, because if you think about it, if every bus company went online, how would you know where to go if you didn't have a device that allows you to look at that online? And even some of the online things is just a print, it's just a page of the timetables on the bus schedule anyway. It's not interactive, it's just a print of the page that's there. And I think this is key to what this question is: might we need to decenter AI in the current media environment, because the media have hyped AI to such an extent that everybody's scared it's going to take over the world, and we're all doomed, to quote Mr. Mann, to quote what's his name from Dad's Army. And the thing about it is, it's not clever. I think that was one of the key things from the keynote yesterday from Professor Market. But was it the fact that AI is just regurgitating stuff that is learned, and that's one of the things that's one of the key messages we need to get across. That this isn't clever stuff. Not to say it's stupid. I think, as Gary Marcus said yesterday as well, I mean, it's just, it's a facilitating stuff. It's that kind of stuff that you need to understand, and it spreads that fear. One of the things he made yesterday as well. So the media is spreading fear about AI because it gets them to sell paper, because it's the next scary thing that's coming out of computers, and it's not that case at all. I think it was demonstrated also from one of the keynotes yesterday. If you ask a stupid question, you get a stupid reply. I think one of the things that was put out there is Egypt being transported across the San Francisco Bridge recently, and it was to give you a date and time it was done. That kind of stuff is, that's what this is about. It's about demystifying it, and at the moment it's a bit like this is the big bad bogeyman at the moment. AI is going to take your job, it's going to kill you, it's going to kill off your business, that kind of stuff, and it's not.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So yeah, I'm hearing first, taking a user-centric approach, remembering whose services are for, and specifically people who might be disadvantaged by the kind of digital first. Yeah, and then just like kind of having sober, realistic conversations about what AI can actually do, and not buying into the hype, or the fear.
Yeah. So
I think it ties back to the first provocation we've got as well. It's designing AI features with and by the people who are going to use it. That's just basic user-centric design stuff. Get people involved in the design, and they'll give you the insights and make that user experience better with the use cases that you have. There's no point in designing a system and going, which was done in the old days, 30, 40 years ago, there you go use it. And everybody's like, well, how do I use it? Because they didn't have user-centric design, you know what I mean?
yeah, it's very much just it's essentially, I understand the problem rather than, well, here's a solution, let's find a problem for it to fix.
Yeah.
Which I think there's a risk. Again, I'm going back to the transportation. So if I take as an example, so the focus probably will be on how can we get timetable, how can we real-time information, but one of the parallel activities involved on, and this is where, for example, AI would be an absolute massive help. So if you have a bus in Glasgow that is running late, it comes to selected junctions, it will hold the traffic lights at green if it's within, a certain distance, etc. But the actual task of basically making that happen is essentially quite cumbersome. It involves maths and stuff which is way beyond me. So that all needs to be manually programmed. This is where we start to think about smart cities and taking it away less from surveillance. It's, for example, so that example I gave you there. So how do you get people to use public transport? You make it more reliable, you make it less expensive, you make it that people aren't late. So using that example there, if you can basically automate, and you can get an AI to basically just sit there and go like, what's happening in the transport network? Okay, those buses are running late. There's things I can do to try and influence that, in real time. I don't need to know any information about any individual. I don't need to, I don't really care what their social demographic status is, etc. But what I'm actually going to do. So this is not quite the self-driving cars and the visions that we've had of, the city, but it's just the little things that it can do to try and basically, okay, let's so that you potentially, let's say you get that happen, you get 2 people a day off a car.
That feeds back into that second point of this provocation about how do we avoid neglecting other fundamental and pressing issues. And that's a great example of how that answers that part of that question, because it's not going to, it doesn't need a user-centered design to do that, but it provides a great benefit to the users of the service.
Yep. Correct.
There's no device needed for that, but in the background, that is giving a better service overall to the wider community, and there's no barriers to access to that.
Yep.
But it's a great example of how people will benefit from it, which I think is really, really good actually. So we've got that on a post-it note then, Joe.
Yeah, I'm scribbling madly.
I mean that's the polar opposite to what we've just discussed before about having to have a device to access and be using the service. That's a great example of a service improvement that would make people's life better without having to have access to devices or a front end of any kind of a time. That's just, it makes people's lives easier. And it improves the city environment as well, because it will reduce pollution, it will reduce buses being stopped, that kind of stuff, which is really good.
Yeah, no, that's a great one. So we've got kind of 2 related but slightly different approaches. We've got user-centered design, and then we've got kind of user-focused benefit, right? Like thinking about who's supposed to benefit from the services.
Yeah, I mean, I still think it's user-centric, because the theme is basically, like, again, I'm clicking back. Why don't people use public transport? It's unreliable. Well, there's various things. It's expensive, it's dirty, and whatever it is.
Yeah.
But one of the ones that you potentially can do something about is it's unreliable. It's it's great. I'd love to get the bus, but at certain times of the day. And again, I know from looking at the data, you've got certain, you can have certain journeys that take a mile takes 5 minutes. Other times of the day it takes 45 minutes. So you know, so there's little things AI can help to try and do that. So that's there is a user-centric element of there of we will make your life better.
Yeah, that's really good.
Definitely.
There's sorry, I just joined late, but I really love that example. And there's
Hello.
there's something about it.
Hi, everyone.
that-
At this point, what we're going to ask you to do in your conversations, if you have not yet, is to start boiling down into at least 3 actions that you think should be taken with regards to your provocation. And I volunteer to write those 1 each on a Post-it note. We have a few minutes together to do that.
I think we've got time for you to jump in there, Michael.
Thanks. No, I really love that example because one of the challenges of AI is, like you say, is exclusion, or not including people and the people at the edges of society. And probably people take buses, right? And not only can you do it, right? Not only can you create, rather than spending billions on a tram system, you can actually make the buses run better just by managing the traffic systems. But you can probably model it and prove it before you can do it. I think that's I really love that because I think a lot about how do you include people or stop them being excluded. And there's a great example of
thing they mentioned the trams, Michael.
Sorry?
The very Edinburgh thing mentioned the trams.
but rapid mass transport is really important. It makes a difference to cities. It increases economic output. It's really, really important. And actually, there should be rapid mass transport. We shouldn't be in cars, right? Simple. That's the future. And the trams are great. I love them, but I think that there's you could do it cheaper with smart city, smart buses that we're talking about.
Yeah.
Sorry about the trams.
Oh, that's great. So can I just tell you what I've got on the Post-its, and then you can tell me what to add or tweak or whatever, so that make sure it reflects the conversation. So on the first one, I've got user-centered design of public services, remember who they're for, and bear in mind access issues, stuff like that. I've got, we need to have sober conversations about what AI can and can't do, to kind of not buy into the hype. And the next one is identify problems first. Don't start with AI as the solution.
Yep.
And then I've got, think about who benefits from services. For example, smart traffic management to improve bus services. Yeah, obviously you guys, there was a lot more to it. So if there's anything you want added or anything changed, let me know before I post these with the group.
I might add to the user centered and the identifying problems is co-create, like really co-create. Don't just do some focus groups, but actually have users involved in the development process all the way along. I think that makes my experience, that makes a huge difference, because you do create solutions to problems that they have rather than making them.
Are we on? So once you have written down your Post-its, and Joe is going to help for the online group, would you please take them to the wall over here and just stick them onto your provocation? And then we'll all come together for a bit of a share out.
Any final thoughts before we rejoin the main group? It's quite compressed, wasn't it? But thanks a lot for sharing. Yeah, go ahead.
I think though, Joe, just to emphasize that media environment thing, making sure that that the hype isn't, well, I think the insights from Gary used to be quite good, about it's only a program. Remember that.
Yeah, definitely. All right, yeah. So I've added kind of don't buy into hype and fear of the media environment. All good? All agreed?
Cool.
All right, thanks. Yeah. Okay, great. Are we all good?
All right, everyone. It's about 1:15. What we'd like to do now is just have an opportunity to go around to each of the groups and ask for a brave volunteer to discuss one of the actions that you thought most pressingly needs to be taken forward right now. We have 6 groups, so if we give everybody roughly 2 minutes, we should be able to get to everyone and pretty much end right on time. So I want to prioritize the online group. I'm told that you can speak to the whole room. So if we could just have someone from the online group who wants to share one of the actions. We'll need the tech team's help. Okay, and if you want to speak, if you can start your video, maybe put a hand up. A virtual hand up. Don't be shy. I would loathe just cold calling someone. We won't make you put your video on. How about that? All you have to do is speak. There's not hundreds of people here. There's maybe like 30 of us.
Hi, I joined
Yay, Michael, thank you
late.
so much.
I have to admit I joined late, so I missed a bit of the discussion. So, but I did get the summary, so I can tell you a few things if that's helpful. There was some discussion about. So, do you just want me to read out a few things? Yeah, is that right?
Yeah, that's fine. You've got roughly 2 minutes, so have at it.
I don't need 2 minutes. There was some discussion about, I heard about having sober conversations about AI and you know, dealing with the hype that the media gives it to it. But at the end of the day, it's just programs and algorithms, and you know that we need to be aware of that. There was a lot of conversation about user-centric design and co-creation, and really identifying problems rather than creating solutions. So working with the users to understand what works for them. And there was a fascinating example that James described, which was about how you can use AI to improve bus services. So by managing traffic signals, you can make buses go faster, make them more reliable, and get more people on the bus, which is better for the environment, et cetera, et cetera. And what I thought was really interesting about that was that it was a use of AI which doesn't require the user to know anything. It just happens for them. And so for me, it's a lot of the issue around AI and technology is that it can exclude people, whereas this would be inclusive because it would just happen. And it could be a way to improve transport without spending lots of money on infrastructure.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Thank you for stepping forward. I'm going to turn to the room now. I'm facing this way, so perhaps someone from this table.
Thank you very much. So I think we could probably boil us down into kind of 2 or 3 main groups. So two of them kind of fall under the banner of access. So both access to data. So we think that action could be taken to presume openness. Obviously, there's some caveats to that, but I think we presume openness, and also access to technology. So if we for example took some of the funding that's available and provided access to equipment, say through the library service or something that already exists, so locations that members of the general public can go to if they don't have that equipment, then they're enabled to take to take more of a part in that as well.
Fantastic, thank you. And to the back, also on the first provocation.
Hi. Just summarizing the 3 points that came from this table. First one was, of course, about user-centric design. It's kind of the norm when it comes to general software development, for example. So why is it not a norm when it comes to designing the future of AI? Second point is having these centralized groups or even decentralized groups who can provide feedback to the experts who are designing the future. So that way it's more inclusive. And we could even leverage social media to create such groups. The third point is to have purpose-led investments, either from private investors or governments or whichever bodies are funding these projects that's designing the AI future, that need to have mandatory purpose-driven objectives. So that'll enable the experts to follow certain guidelines to create a future, design an AI future with and by the end users. Thank you. I hope I summarized it.
Thank you. I'm so pleased that everyone is staying right under time. Good job. All right, to the middle on the third provocation.
Hello, we were looking at the obligation of researchers and designers to develop greater social literacy. We got a bit sidetracked. We focused on the need to make what you're doing accessible to lay people for a bit. But we also focused on the problem with social literacy is it's quite a rich concept. It's not like you can go and do a framework or a checkbox. So really we focused on that need to have researchers talking to people who don't share their ethical intuitions or backgrounds. And the fact that that can feel quite risky because you may be sharing stuff which is uncertain or at an experimental stage. And maybe researchers feel difficult to boil it down to simple language. They might get challenged in ways they're not comfortable with. And our thought on how we might make it happen, I guess, is maybe about having resource to help make sure that researchers did this, that they did go and take time to include other voices in their work.
Great. Thank you so much. Over here on the second provocation.
Yeah, hi there. In terms of provocation 2, how do we design and govern AI wisely and inclusively amid the race for AI superiority? Do we need something like a slow AI movement? Actually, rather than having a slow AI movement, we did have a discussion whether that be more about having an inclusive AI movement. And I think one of the things that we also discussed within the group was how AI in its current form can disable. And what we want to do is we want to encourage to enable access. So we were talking about public services and the role that public services and the government has on making sure that services are accessible. And one of the ways in which we can use AI is how can we make it, rather than how can we make it harder for people to access, but how can we enable access? So very much about, and within that, there are regulations already in place. So that we've got the Human Rights Act from 1998, we've got the Equality Act from 2010. So there are regulations already in relation to how people access services and the steps that we need to take. So very much about how can we enable access through the use of AI.
Fantastic, thank you. And last but not least.
So we were on the same provocation as this table. So I think we sort of agreed that there must be some regulation in there somewhere, because we sort of kept coming back to this idea of, well, what's the incentive? And it's, it's money, it's the economic system. So if you want to slow down AI, companies are going to be going for the money. That's what companies do. So one thing we talked about was, is there a way to kind of decouple the innovation? It's fine maybe to innovate fast, but do you want to implement it fast? And that maybe works fine in a financial system. You can say, well, we're not going to implement our model for, mortgage decisions or whatever. But with ChatGPT, it's very different because it's already out there being used. So we weren't quite sure. We really struggled with concrete actions. But one thing we said was even just having the conversations between, I guess we've got, some data scientists on this side of the table and some more policy folks as well. So maybe some kind of like buddy scheme, or a bit like a language exchange where it's like, well, actually you have someone to talk to about, I think we were talking more about the technical expertise being available to policymakers, but actually the other way around is also so important, right? On the understanding the social thing. And then we also talked about maybe some kind of incentives. Then, if money is the incentive, in my company, we've recently got the disability confidence status, which has allowed us actually to go for more public sector contracts. So if you had something like that for AI, that is you need to somehow link the financial incentives to doing the right thing. I think it's important. Did I miss anything?
Wonderful. Thank you all so much for sharing that. It sounds like your conversations were very rich. What is going to happen from here is that the organizing team will take these outputs and the stickies that you've produced, and they will be part of what ultimately becomes the final report for this entire program that we have done with the support of the Alan Turing Institute. And once that is completed, we will make it available on the Center for Technomoral Futures website, which is on the slide right now. I would also be remiss if I did not acknowledge that we are celebrating 60 years of AI at the University of Edinburgh, and this event is certainly kind of considered part of that celebration. My clock says 00, so I'm going to hand it over to Cam, and thank you all very, very much for your engagement and participation today.